Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining this edition of the Global Stewardship Group's quarterly webinar series. I'm David Knowles, Senior Director of Membership and Outreach for GSG. We are pleased to have such a large turnout for today's webinar, Solutions to Common Challenges in the Audit Process. And today we are fortunate to have Larissa Bosch, Stewardship and Compliance Specialist for Ag-Reliant Genetics, Patrick Rudelsheim, one of our ETS and PBI Management Program auditors from 3Bio, and Chris Holdgreaves, CEO of the Global Stewardship Group. We will have time for questions at the end, and you may type your questions into the chat window at any time or click the hand raise button when we get to question time. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available to GSG members. And so with that, I will turn it over to Chris Holdgreave to get us started.
Thanks, David. Just checking to make sure you can hear me all right and that you can see my screen.
Yes.
All right, very good. So again, I want to echo David's sentiment. We very much appreciate the large number of participants for the webinar this morning. I know this topic is of particular interest. We certainly won't be able to cover all of the issues related to the audit process today, but hopefully we can hit on sort of a few main concerns that we often see raised and have really good perspective from both an ETS member and expert in this field, as well as one of our expert auditors. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to start it off, just being able to sort of set the stage for some of the things that come up most often in discussions that we have with either our audit partners or our members, program participants in the various programs that we operate. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just set it up with a few things that we sort of hear regularly and the sort of base solution around some of those concerns before we turn it over then to the real experts in the field with Larissa and Patrick. So just to sort of go through a few of the things that we sort of get the most questions about relative to the audit process. Really understanding what the systems level audit entails is one of those things that we do get quite frequently, that it's at the systems level. So it doesn't dig down deeper into multiple layers, but it does make sure that you could verify and document by looking at the appropriate evidence that the program participant has put the things in place that they need to relative to the programs that they're engaged in. So they have the appropriate management and quality management systems in place that meet the basic considerations for either the ETS program, the PBI program, or both, depending on their membership status. But the level of that audit is often sort of less well understood between when you have the auditor and the auditee, making sure that that understanding between those groups is really important. I know both Patrick and Larissa will talk about sort of the importance of communication, but making sure that there's a good understanding of what that systems level audit means and how that works in practice. So the second thing we get a lot about is, what does it mean to make that determination? Do you just have to show that you have a process written down on paper? Do you have to show things? So that's the other thing that we get a lot. And really I talk about it in sort of two layers relative to a determination. One, has the process, policy, or procedure actually been developed? So is there a procedure for a particular activity that needs to be done based on the stewardship and quality management systems? So has it been developed? Has it been written down? Is there a document that talks about that policy, process, or procedure? So that's the one layer. And then the second thing, the auditor has to determine that, yes, that they have that process and it's been developed, but has it been implemented? So you may be able to show something like an SOP or work instructions or something, but then how do you show that it's actually been implemented? And that's through your records. So it's really focuses on sort of those two levels. Make sure that development has happened, and then make sure it's being implemented by showing that you have certain records in place. Now, we do get several times a year questions about, well, what if we have a process or a procedure, but it's something that we actually haven't needed to utilize. Maybe it's an incident response procedure that, and there hasn't been incidents, or some other thing that you really haven't used yet, and you may use in the future, but you want to document that process. So we do coach both the auditor and the auditee. Say yes, there may be some determinations that are made just by developing the process and procedure, understanding that there may not be any records to show that you're actually using it because it hasn't come up. Or perhaps you're not at that stage of development yet, but you have developed a process. So we do understand as part of the audit process that you may have those types of situations that occur. And that's okay. It's just one of those things that, again, goes back to that communication aspect between the auditor and the auditee to understand that that's the particular situation, so that the implementation part, maybe showing records of something, becomes not applicable based on that particular situation. And then what would an organization need to show relative to objective evidence? And it's really what they need to examine in order to make that appropriate determination for each question. So as we coach organizations through this process, we often say go through a self-assessment, right? So you have a checklist, a fairly detailed checklist called our self-assessment tool that you can utilize to go through and ask yourselves those very specific questions. And what we have room for in that self-assessment is writing down what you would find relative to that objective evidence. So making sure that that's noted as part of your sort of pre-audit process, so that's not a surprise when the auditor comes in and you have to show that you actually have evidence that something is being utilized. So you have, the record keeping as part of that process, whatever the particular activity happens to be. And then finally, what is verbal evidence? We talk about verbal evidence quite a bit in the auditor training. The idea is that this will be an opportunity for an auditor to talk to employees in those particular activities which they're auditing, that demonstrates that the employee has that knowledge and understanding of the quality management system and its implementation, so that they have a good understanding of that. This cannot be the only evidence that's presented. It wouldn't just be verbal evidence, but it supports the overall determination that the auditor will make by having an employee actually walk through that process. So that can get to that second part of that determination, showing that it's been implemented. So you certainly have a process to develop, but can an employee actually talk you through that process to show you how it works in practice? So those are just some of the high level concerns that often come up when we talk to members and auditors about the ETS and PBI audit process. To take sort of the other approach, what we often hear about when problems happen. What happens when certain challenges arise and are identified during the audit? So those can lead to various outcomes, and some that we really want to try to avoid. So just to name a few things, so something like a major nonconformity occurs. This could potentially lead to an audit failure. So what we do is we coach both the parties, again, the auditor and the auditee, to work towards some type of resolution. So if there's a general agreement on that nonconformity, this is a major gap that we've identified. The auditor identifies that. The auditee understands, we've fallen short in that area. So rather than submit a failed audit, what we coach both parties to do is work towards some type of resolution. So can this be resolved over a certain time frame? Maybe it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever it happens to be. But for the auditor and the organization being audited to work together to identify, okay, this is what needs to change, or what needs to be closed. This is how you might go through that process. And in a set amount of days, again, whether it's 30, 60, 90 or more, depending on the complexity of the problem, then you would say that is the time frame in which we have to correct that. And the auditor can come back and re-audit just that particular portion of the activities that are being done. So again, what we want to avoid is hopefully not having an audit failure. And we understand there are things that are going to happen. There are nonconformities that are going to be shown. But how do we try to get you to a successful outcome with that? So that's sort of a key thing we want to talk through with the auditors and those organizations being audited, is that you can work through a process to get to an endpoint where the actual nonconformity, the gap is filled, it's improved. The auditor can then make a successful determination for you. Now, the other thing can happen is a minor nonconformity, and if that builds up to being a number of minor nonconformities, that could lead to a failure, depending on how significant those are and how many they have. But again, that same situation applies. Are these things that can be corrected over a certain time frame, and then the auditor can come back, make sure that those corrections have been made and implemented, and work towards again a successful conclusion to your audit process. And then the last thing I'll mention, we get often asked, we get all these opportunities for improvement. How does that impact our recognition, or is that a problem? What do we have to do with those? We have to show that we've addressed them all before we can be successful. And no, that's not really the case with this. Part of the value of having this different set of eyes on your systems is that you get these maybe very detailed opportunities for improvement. It doesn't necessarily mean your system is bad. It just gives you opportunities in which you might be able to make it better. And that's actually a great value add to the audit process. We as an organization don't ever see these opportunities for improvement. So those are strictly between the auditor and the auditee. And those are things that you can address and implement. Sometimes you get a list of 20, 30 opportunities for improvement, and maybe 20 of them make sense for you to implement. You can do these or these 15 or whatever it happens to be. And then there'll be some that for whatever reason really don't make sense for you to actually implement. And that's fine. You should have a reason as to why that isn't. Again, it doesn't go to us. You don't have to do that justification to us, but just as part of an internal process. But again, for us, we're really looking at that overall pass fail. So we don't see the details of this, but really to maximize the value that you're going to get out of this audit process, we hope that you will have a very detailed report that you get from the auditor that would address these areas and give you a great opportunity to improve your system. That's really one of the great values of going through this process. I'm just going to lastly touch on a couple clarifications. So for the ETS and PBI related operations, you would work with the auditor to develop the appropriate plan for verification. So that means that you, as the organization, are directing which activities are being audited. So if you have, say 5 laboratories, you don't have to have all 5 being audited. It's just a representative sample of those. And you will select that. The auditor doesn't select that. You will direct them to the appropriate ones as part of this. Now you have to implement the ETS program or the PBI program across your operations. But for the audit process, we're only looking for a representative sample of those. And again, whether it's labs, greenhouses, or other field sites, et cetera, it's really looking at a sample of those and not all of them. And those are directed by you. So you'll work with the auditor to develop the actual plan. This is important for organizations that are joining both ETS or have joined both ETS and PBI, or may add that PBI program in the future. We are looking at a single program audit, which covers both programs. We really didn't want to get into a situation where we're overburdensing with multiple audits, a lot more questions, some duplicative questions that cover both programs. So the idea is that a single program audit can cover both of those programs through the GSG. And for those that are going through the ETS process now, but then may in, say, a year add PBI, you don't have to go through that whole process for both programs again. You'll get credit for your ETS audit that you've already done, and then all you will do is add the few questions that are different for that PBI program to be successful with both programs. So we want to really make sure that this wasn't something that was overly burdensome for those that want to participate in multiple programs or want to add, particularly those that are adding PBI at a later date. We want to make sure that we work with you. That's sort of the last point on here, with each participant to make sure that your audit plans are comprehensive, that they cover multiple programs. And again, if you're ETS now and are thinking about joining PBI in a year or 2 years or whatever, we will work with you to make sure that we work on a similar audit cycle, that we can do one program audit. You can cover all of those functions within that program audit. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the others, as part of this webinar this morning, as our experts will give you great detail on some of those common solutions or solutions to the common challenges that we tend to see most often in the audit process. So David, I'll turn it back over to you so you can introduce our next guests.
Thank you, Chris. And I will turn it right over to Larissa Bosch from Ag-Reliant Genetics. If you can share your slides with us and go right ahead when you are ready.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes,
Great. Okay, now can you see me?
yes, we see you and your slides.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Larissa Bosch. I am the Stewardship and Compliance Specialist at Ag-Reliant Genetics, and we are based in Westfield, Indiana, in the United States. As a company, we have just successfully completed our cycle with ETS, and because of this recent completion, they asked that we participate in this webinar. So we're here today to discuss the solutions to common challenges in the audit process. When I talk about the solutions to common challenges in the audit process, I see two aspects, both pre-audit and then during the audit itself. So there are going to be steps that you take in the years prior to your official ETS audit that help to prevent challenges. And then, of course, there are challenges that can arise during the audit that you have to solve in the moment. But I firmly believe in the 5 Ps that proper planning prevents poor performance. So a lot of the solutions to common challenges that I'm going to describe today are really just about audit preparation. So let's talk about it. Audit preparation and how you can help your facilities prepare for participation in the ETS audit. At Ag-Reliant, we conduct internal audits annually that have a basis on the ETS modules that are applicable to the job functions at each facility. When I conduct an internal audit, I'm going to be tougher and I'm going to be pickier because I'm doing it with the purpose of preparing them for the possibility of participation in an external audit. When one of our locations is selected for participation, it's not going to be the first time that they're answering the questions, but it might be the first time that they see them in that format or grammatically. So it's my job to help them to understand the questions in each applicable module and how they correlate to the functions at their facility. Uh, Sorry, I lost myself. Because we audit on this set cadence, we have some added flexibility. So, for instance, we shifted functions at one of our facilities that had been selected for the last ETS audit cycle. And therefore, it was just more representative of our company and cost effective to shift the ETS audit to other facilities. Because our audit is based on the checklist, our company, all of our employees are well acquainted with the requirements set forth long prior to participation in an actual ETS audit. So even if we have to shift those audit sites, our facilities are going to be prepared. Now, conducting internal audits annually may not be attainable for everyone. So this can look like hiring an external consultant. They will help to review your operations, identify any gaps, and provide feedback prior to your official audit. Other options might be to leverage partnerships with a larger company to utilize their resources or partnering with another company, such as working with another company if you're based within a research hub. Even within ETS, there's plenty of valuable resources. My first step is always to contact Priscilla. The ETS website has a ton of guides like the descriptions of the audit process, the self-assessment tool, internal audit training, and the checklists themselves. But Priscilla is so knowledgeable and she is so helpful. She's going to be able to point you towards the best documents and guides. She's also working to curate curriculum within the learning management system that's going to be extremely valuable in preparation. Another important piece of audit preparation is understanding your auditor's expectations, and you can find that through a pre-audit meeting. You can use that time to uh, meet with your auditor to discuss a base knowledge of your company's organization, determine whether on-site or remote sessions are appropriate. You would discuss the audit schedule so that you and the involved facilities know how to navigate the day or days of the audit. You can also determine what methods or records that they consider to be appropriate evidence and align on any documentation that should be provided ahead of the audit. So using all of this information in a pre-audit meeting with my auditor, I can better prepare my facilities for an audit. We can review each of the ETS module questions for applicability, formulate our answers, and collect relevant procedures or records. And with all of that preparation, we should be able to avoid a lot of challenges. Next, I want to talk about the logistics of completing an ETS audit, such as how you choose which of your internal facilities are going to be participating. I recommend scheduling well in advance so that you can establish a timeline for communications with the auditor and your auditees. You should allow plenty of time to prepare, but this is also to ensure that the appropriate employees are going to indeed be available the day of the audit. You should choose your audit locations that would be most representative, impactful, and cost-effective to your company. And this might look like a few things. So facilities with large-scale operations, they might be the most impactful as they can help drive change at your smaller scale facilities. They may also be the most representative of your company's organization. It's cost effective to select locations that have multiple functions or departments so that you can complete multiple modules of the ETS audit. And if you can't stay at one facility, you should try to select some that are in proximity to each other to save on travel, cost, and time. At AgriLiant, we would also choose facilities that ideally have experienced employees. So our compliance coordinators participate in our annual audits, and they are well acquainted with the requirements of ETS, our quality management system, and our standards. But the more years of experience that they have means that they're going to be more comfortable with the audit process and just have a greater ability to communicate effectively with an auditor. But they aren't the only ones that can be questioned, especially if the auditor requests a tour of your facility, which I do recommend. Um, all employees at your facility really should have a good understanding of their position, how it relates to your overall quality management system, and how they complete their job according to quality standards. And they should be prepared to exemplify that in the presence of an auditor. And of course, there are challenges that can occur prior to your audit, like I mentioned on the last slide. At AgriLiant, one of our facilities had a shift in their functions, so we shifted our audit sites. GSG and ETS are more than happy to amend your audit cycle or audit plan. It's just important to maintain communication with them, keeping them updated so that they can monitor your reports, finalize your cycle, and issue certificates. Another challenge, both pre-audit and during the audit itself, can be understanding the expectations of your auditor. To be able to wholly answer yes to your checklist question, you need to understand what methods or records that your auditor considers to be appropriate evidence. This might be discussed with your auditor in the pre-audit meeting, but they may also prefer to sample live, as it can be very, very valuable. As we have just completed our audit cycle, I can provide an example as to how our auditor expected us to satisfactorily answer. He expected a documented standard operating procedure and a record to support that we were completing the tasks according to that standard. So, two pieces of objective evidence. As ETS, we required one, and the verbal evidence, we were kind of we prepared evidence ahead of schedule, but we had to spend additional time for each question to pull that matching record. And we understand how that method of auditing is valuable. It's just that the expectation was not communicated prior to the audit during our pre-audit meeting. Had we had that understanding, we would have been able to work through that audit checklist more efficiently because having the right paperwork, be it procedures or records, is really important so you can move through efficiently and avoid any challenges that arise. At AgriLiant, we also choose a different auditor for each cycle. That helps us to gain more perspectives and just have a more well-rounded experience when it comes to ETS. And each auditor is going to be different, from the way that they like to conduct their audit to the types of evidence that they wish to see from us. So to combat challenges pre-audit, we maintain an internal list of auditor expectations, and we use that to help prepare our facilities during audit prep meetings. We will also update it with each turn of the cycle. So our previous auditor's expectation of 2 objective samples of evidence, that document and supporting record, we added that to our list. And we will also be able to update our internal annual audit checklist and my practices as an auditor so that we can fully incorporate that auditor's insights and opportunities for improvement that we see fit. Another and final challenge that I have identified is communication during an audit. It's really important for participants to be able to effectively communicate with the auditor during both an internal and external audit. You need to be able to communicate your practices in ways that are going to satisfy the expectations of each. When it comes to an ETS audit, You may want to conduct a site tour first. It's just a way for the auditor to see the processes in action. It's so much easier to relate to and to describe procedures when your auditor has a sort of reference to your facility. You should also ensure that any employees still conducting work within their facility are prepared to answer questions honestly about how they complete their jobs. Another part of effective communication is just having the right people available and involved in your audit process. At AgReliant, we've got subject matter experts. They're going to know their job inside and out, and they're able to explain processes more completely. We have location managers that have a general understanding of all of the functions at their location, as well as the higher level site operations. And we have compliance coordinators. They understand the structure of the quality management system and have a reliable record keeping system. And it's really through effective communication with all of these partners that an auditor can more fully understand our processes and then be able to provide insights and suggest opportunities for improvement. I also have the topic of audit anxiety. Working with involved employees during preparation meetings can help ease audit anxiety, but as we all know, there is a huge difference in sitting down with me, answering questions with your colleague and friend versus representing your entire company to an external auditor. So, like I said, it's important to have the right people available to answer the questions and describe their processes. Relying on one person to have all of the answers can be both very stressful and can lead to misrepresentations of your company and processes. In addition to your subject matter experts, having an internal auditor like myself present and participating can be helpful in alleviating anxiety. So my role during an external audit is to aid in steering of conversations. So I have much more familiarity with the overarching quality management system, so I can answer questions at a high level and I can help others to navigate the questions and how they answer. It's somehow very easy to become both anxious and start oversharing, or to become really comfortable in conversation with your auditor and stray from the topic at hand. So I help to ensure that the auditor remains within scope while questioning and that employees remain in scope while answering. So in conclusion, my biggest solution to the audit challenges is that today's preparation is tomorrow's success. Having your pre-audit meeting with your auditor, working through those ETS checklists with your employees, and having the right people available to describe your processes is some of the most valuable advice that I can give. So the way that you prepare and help your facilities prepare for an audit is really the most effective way to alleviate challenges in the audit process. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Larissa. That was terrific. Just a reminder to folks, you may type questions into the chat at any time, and we'll get to them at the end. And also, if you want to ask your question verbally, go ahead and raise your hand, and again, we'll get to that, get to you at the end. So Patrick is going to give us his perspective on the audit process and challenges from an auditor point of view. So go right ahead, Patrick.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And just to check, you can see the presentation and you can hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction, the opportunity to talk today. I'm presented here as an auditor for both ETS and the PBI program. In fact, I've been following the program and the different initiatives since the early start in 2007. So it's with a lot of pleasure that I'm seeing all the progress that is being made and the different documents that are being developed, and more members, of course, joining the program. When I mentioned that we are 3Bio, actually 3Bio stands now for the three type of services that we're offering, and they're all related to biological material. Part is about the access and benefit sharing of genetic resources. Then we have a part which is working on biosafety and biosecurity management. And then there is a part which is more looking at biotech regulatory, and with let's say also then the add-on of the stewardship as being a logic step towards ensuring that everything remains with the proper identity, with the proper purity, and in full compliance. So that's what 3Bio stands for. When discussing the challenges, and I know when Chris, you already mentioned, obviously there's a lot we can discuss, but maybe I would like to focus on a few very specific ones from an auditor point of view. The first one for me, or for when we do the audit, is indeed to fully understand the scope. And I know that within the programs, there is this part about, we have to look at the product life cycle and where exactly is the auditee fitting into that. We can look at operations, and we have the different type of operations, from the lab to the greenhouse, to seed production, to field trials. All of these steps are well defined. And we have, of course, the different components in terms of the different elements of the program, from plant product integrity to incident response, product launch, you name it. This looks like a logical way of preparing. However, I think when you try to understand the scope, I think you really want to go further into that. And I think we spent quite some time with the auditee to really appreciate their specific way of working in these different parts. We've been looking at organizations which actually are in a research environment, and they may have very limited activities that are subject to the audit. On the other hand, you may be looking at really subsidiaries of international companies, which are spanning a lot of different activities with a lot of material being shipped. And again, if I explain it like this, it sounds logic that of course you have the small, you have the big, you have many different layers. However, if you start to think about it, maybe that small one specific lab actually is working with hundreds of constructs every year, with hundreds of different events every year. And their challenge is going to be quite different if you compare that with, let's say, an organization that may be handling lots of seats, lots of seats, and try to bring it to the commercial level, but they may be working only with one event. And in that case, of course, you can see that the systems approach that we're discussing here will be quite different, and the challenges that they both have to meet, the systems that they have to put in place, are quite different. So from an auditor point of view, it's really important to, when you prepare for this, that you at least anticipate what type of expectation there is, what type of complexity that you may face, because that's going to influence a lot the way that you can expect the organization to prepare itself. With that in mind, of course, it also comes to the point of being open in terms of not having any kind of expectation of what kind of system that people will have put in place. Because it's tailored to the organization, they can actually be quite different. And again, that's where fully understand the scope of what the auditee is doing, or the site that we're going to audit, we find that quite important as a way to prepare and also to interact with the auditee. When it then comes to the audit, and I think Larissa was already also alluding to the fact of this kind of effective communication, I think we see the effective communication as an open dialogue. And here are some of the things that we put on ourselves to be, when we communicate, to make sure that we try to understand as good as possible what is implemented, what is put in place, why things are being done in a certain way. And these are just the points that you could expect from any open dialogue: respectful, honest and straightforward, patient and understanding, careful listening, not defensive. And they sound pretty straightforward when they're put on a sheet like this one. But occasionally you can encounter during an audit these things going the wrong direction, so to say. Obviously, organizations want to show them from their best side. I think we understand that, and there's always something that is maybe imperfect. Yeah. So trying to have an honest view on that, trying to be clear on that, also not being too picky on any particular point that may not be as expected. I think it can only prove that there is a system in place and that occasionally it may not be followed 100%. Being patient and understanding, not having presumptions, not trying to work on the basis of we've seen this 100 times, this will be the 101 time, and therefore we can quickly skip. I think we really need to understand why people are doing certain things in a certain way, which actually can be better than the previous 100 times. Not defensive, of course. As soon as you start to make a comment as an auditor, you understand that people will try to defend their case. I think, again, that can be done in an open way. It can be done in a respectful way. And if ever we come to a real important disagreement, I think we can still take it up and bring it to the people from the Global Stewardship Group to understand how they would see in a certain way the interpretation of that specific kind of topic. So having an open dialogue, I think, is something that, again, it comes back to fully understanding why things are done in a certain way and how we can build on that to further improve. That brings me to the last challenge, which is the fact that we're obviously there to verify conformity, but we're also there to support improvement. And I think this is part where we really focus on trying to identify those elements, which are potentially still in conformity, but where at least the organization can have a benefit in further exploring how they can address that. On this slide, I've also included, let's say, a number of audit cycles, because what we've seen over the years is, especially for those organizations which have been going through several cycles of audits, that of course the first audit you can expect for many people, for many organizations, this is like a brave new world they're entering. They're not quite sure yet. They have implemented, they've done their best. As Larissa was saying, they've done maybe also internal audits before, but still that first audit is a little bit an unexpected event, in terms of what will happen, how will it go, and eventually, of course, then people will pass this, but it's a new experience. You can see that by the second audit, things obviously are better, they're more organized, people have learned from the first experience, and things are improving. Typically later on you see more consolidation, more systems are put in place, there is more of a routine. You get into a real habit of working through this. Gradually you see that there is coming to this effort of maintenance. How do we maintain the system going? Because after the first initial hype, I think there's a little bit of a fatigue coming in. People may not fully appreciate anymore why it's done. And there's really a lot of effort going on to maintain the entire system. But gradually you can see, and I've put audit 5, but it doesn't really matter how much time you've spent on this. Gradually you see that when an organization moves on, this potential for continuous improvement is also slowing down. It's not that you can make these big changes anymore, because if you're still doing the same business like so many years ago, then actually you probably have already achieved a lot. So the question on what else can you do is also something that the auditor must keep in mind in terms of looking for those opportunities for further improvement that maybe from the experience that we have, we can share with you, because we understand it's a challenge to continue on this improvement track once you have really established a lot of excellent procedures. In that process also comes, of course, the element of replacement of people. Typically, given the time frame that is there, you'll see staff turnover, you see new people getting involved, and it's always a challenge to get them really up to speed with a complex system once you have put it in place. So I think from our point of view, definitely this idea is not just about verifying the conformity, but also really helping to indicate some areas of improvement that can help you in this continuous cycle. So before going into the discussion, I think again, for us to repeat our points of understanding the scope, in order to really prepare ourselves as good as possible. And this goes beyond the fact of the components, the life cycle parts, as well as the facilities, the operations. An open dialogue, we do appreciate that there is this anxiety, but trying to get past that point and trying to make sure that everybody understands that there is that this is an opportunity for further improvements, and then to really look also not only at verifying the conformity, but also at supporting further improvements. So with that, I again like to thank you for this opportunity, and we look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. So we have plenty of time for questions. If anybody has a question, I don't see anything in the chat yet, and I don't see any raised hands, but if I am somehow overlooking your raised hand, feel free to just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
I have a question, a more general question. I'm Florence Goubet from BSF in Belgium, and it's a more general question for, I think, the three presenters. You are discussing about conflict and how to manage all the audit in a proper manner. And you are also discussing about non-conformity and opportunity of improvement. Are they all those put together in a report sent by the ETS or the GSG committee, or it's sent individually by the auditor?
Do any of our presenters wish to field that question?
Well, I think as an auditor, I can, you know, that the only report that we're supposed to send to ETS is the report which is approved by the auditee, and which is a summary report, which indicates for which parts of the program the audit has been conducted and what the result is. So that's the only thing that really is submitted to ETS. When I was talking about conflicts, I think it had more to do with if there really is a disagreement between the auditor and the auditee, and it's really something that has to do with the program. I think there is obviously an opportunity to go back to GSG to look at further guidance on what it means. I must say I've never had it, but I can imagine that it's possible that indeed there is a kind of a disagreement on how certain elements of the program may be interpreted. But that's as far as it goes. It's not, as far as I know, it's not becoming a real formal documented element that is sent to ETS. And Chris or Dave, you may want to comment.
Yeah, that's right, Patrick. So we do have, so as I mentioned, we do, if there are those issues, we first recommend that the auditor and the organization being audited, come together, to some sort of agreement. If there isn't that, if there remains a disagreement, there is a process, sort of mediation process that you would go through, which comes to me as the executive director of the Excellence Through Stewardship program, to make a determination on that. If there is, like Patrick said, our first effort always is to try to work through those differences and to come to some sort of agreement. But if it did get to that point, and we, in my 15 years, or in the 15 years that the organization has been involved, in my 13 years that I've been involved, we haven't gotten to that point. We've always been able to figure out sort of a resolution to that prior to it getting to that point. But Patrick's point is also correct. The only thing we ever see, and obviously if there was an actual situation where there would be disagreement, we would get more detail on what that disagreement is. But other than that, we would really only see that report that's delivered to us that's sort of a pass-fail for each of those individual components, directed to us at the direction of the auditee, the company being audited.
Thank you. I was just wondering because in my past, when I was participating as auditee in the ETS audit, then it was only the summary report that you mentioned, and we had a kind of a report of opportunity for improvement working.
Right.
So I was wondering if I missed something that was a change that I was not aware. Thank you.
No. Yeah, and just so people are aware, really to get the full value out of the audit, we do expect that you would get a more detailed report. But again, we don't ever see that. We don't want to see that just for a lot of liability purposes and other reasons. It's important for us to just see that pass-fail part. But for your value, we hope that you're getting much more opportunities for improvement in those kind of things.
We have a question in the chat from Volker Mittendorf of Gates Agricultural Innovations. We had the pleasure of meeting Volker a couple days ago, and they hosted us in St. Louis, which was a really great experience for us, and we appreciate that. Patrick, this question is for you. Regarding the effort in maintenance, is there information or a system for assessing and describing the maturity level of an organization?
No, I don't think there's a formal one. I think obviously there's a part where you say like an organization needs to pass the audit. So I think it's one point of saying even the first audit, we verify that there is conformity, which means that the system is in place, has been implemented, and so on. But clearly, there is also opportunity for continuous improvement. So I think what I wanted to allude to is that whereas in the beginning, you can clearly see that an organization starts to implement on the basis of what they already have done. I think most organizations already have some systems in place, but with stepping up to the stewardship effort, they are just gearing it up and making it as one effort, so to say. And you can see that is a major step. The next audits, you can also still see some things which are really very much consolidation and further improvement. But there is a point, and especially if you say like, if you have an organization which has been doing that same business for so many years, and really has built on that experience, the added changes, the add-on and the incremental improvement becomes less. And again, it doesn't say that there's no opportunity for improvement. It's just that actually thinking about what else can we do to further improve what we're doing becomes much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I was calling it more like a maintenance, because then the challenge for those organizations is actually more the maintenance part, because now they have this system, they know how to do this, but the risk for, getting sloppy, and I'm very careful what I'm saying here, but the risk of saying, sure, we have done it always this way, and this is the correct way, that risk is actually becoming bigger than let's look for a new opportunity for improvement.
Yeah, there's concern that you get to a point where there's complacency can set in, and so to Patrick's point exactly is the challenge becomes making sure that you're living up to that standard by which you've sort of gone through that process on multiple occasions.
Any other questions? Again, if I'm overlooking your raised hand, just go ahead and unmute and ask your question. I don't see anything in the chat right now. If you think of a question later, feel free to contact us at info@gsg.ag, or if you have contact information for Chris, Priscilla, or me, you can, of course, reach out to us that way.
And just to follow up on what's noted in the chat, that ETS is the Excellence Through Stewardship, and that's the name of the program that is dedicated to those working in transgene technologies. So when we talk about ETS, we're talking about excellence through stewardship and sort of traditional biotechnology, so transgene of foreign DNA in the product. And then the other program, PBI MP, so Plant Breeding Innovations Management Program, is more geared towards new plant breeding innovations such as genome editing. So sorry that we sort of glossed over that, but there's that distinction there between the two programs. The reality of how these programs work from an audit perspective is that there's quite a bit of overlap between the two. So that those organizations that are part of both programs, a lot of what would be added for PBI, Plant Breeding Innovations, is already covered through excellence through stewardship. So that makes it, easier to do that sort of leveraged one audit situation. But that's just so you're aware of sort of the program distinctions that Global Stewardship Group is operating. We have separate and distinct programs, one for traditional GM technology, so genetic modification, and then one for traditional GE technology, so genome editing technology. And that's the distinction between the two programs. Again, because of the wide line of overlap between the two, we certainly are easily able to leverage those audits, but they are separate and distinct programs because there are significant differences between the two. And certainly from a perception standpoint, also, we didn't want, the genome editing types of technologies to run some of the same issues that we've had relative to the GMO technology. So that's the distinction of the programs, even though from an audit perspective, we're able to cover both through one audit with just a few questions that are specific to maybe the ETS and the transgene technology, and a few that are very specific to the plant breeding innovations or genome editing technology.
Also, for that, John Martin from Brian, I have a question also. But my question was for major non-conformity. If you have the two programs, if you are audited by the two programs, GAG and PBI, will non-conformity can stop one of the two programs, or do you see that in the future?
We were having a little trouble hearing you. Were any of our presenters ever able to make out the question? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I'm Jerome Martin. Can you hear me a bit better?
That is better.
Oh, okay, thank you. So yeah, my question was regarding the audit for both programs, GAG and PBI, and I was wondering if you were for both, if you got better non-conformity. Will this impact both programs, or will only conduct to just the program that has the non-conformity?
Yeah, so Jerome, that's also sort of a good point that we should raise, is that the recognitions for both programs are distinct. So there could be a situation where you might have that issue with one of the programs. The reality, though, is because of that overlap, if it's something that negatively impacts, would be identified by an auditor as a major nonconformity that covers both those technologies, then yeah, it would be a problem for both. But there is a situation, because they're recognized separately, that hey, maybe this just is impactful on because of what you're doing relative to GM and the ETS program, that it could just be an issue relative to that. So it's really dependent on where in the process that it is. Is it something that would cover both? But there is two distinct recognitions. So there is a situation where you could be recognized positively on one and have a situation on the second one. And we need to address that to be successful.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Again, please feel free to reach out, info@gsg.ag. And if your questions for Patrick or Larissa, we'll certainly forward those questions on to them. So
and David, if I could just, before we wrap it up, just to close out, just so people have this information, we are currently working on a course preparing for your first ETS audit, or first audit, program audit. It could be ETS or PBI. And while it says, I think first in the title, we'll probably alter that because it might be useful to those that have, maybe it's been a few years since you've gone through the process. But we're in the process of working through our Audit Operations Committee to finalize an update to that presentation, which I think will be very helpful. It covers a lot of the things that we talked about here today, as well as a number of other steps related to that audit process that I think will be really valuable. So be on the lookout for that, and sort of future, David will probably announce through newsletters or other opportunities when that's available. But it'll definitely be a great resource on the audit perspective. But also know that we are here to help with this process. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to Priscilla, David, or myself if you have questions, comments, concerns related to the audit process. We're always happy to answer those.
Great. Okay. I think that will wrap us up for today. So you will receive a link to a survey on the webinar. And if you can take a few minutes to provide some feedback, it really does help us improve future webinars and help us to present topics that are most beneficial to our members. As a reminder, the webinar was recorded and will be made available to GSG members. Thank you again to Larissa, Patrick, and Chris. I know you're all very busy with all of your work and responsibilities, so it really means a lot to us that you've taken the time to present and share your expertise with us and your fellow members. And of course, thank you to all of the attendees for your participation today. And I hope you all have a great day or evening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.